All right, everyone. Welcome to For the Love of Language. I'm EJ.
And I'm Stacy.
And today we are so excited. We're going to talk about a Bluey episode.
I just have to say right off the bat that Bluey is probably one of my favorite shows, just like ever. I have 0 kids. EJ has 1 kid. I have 0. And I don't plan on ever having kids. But Bluey is just so wholesome and so fun, and I enjoy every second of it. So we were both very excited to record this episode.
Right, because we had actually both watched Bluey individually.
Yes.
And heard this episode. And when I saw this episode, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to do a podcast about it, because this episode is called Dunny.
Yes.
And it's all about restricting words, about what is appropriate to use.
What language do you want used in your home and why? And so I think, first of all, I'll do a quick little background on what Bluey even is, because there may be some people out there who don't know what Bluey is. So Bluey...
It's only the best show ever.
It's only the best show ever, and it's super accessible. The episodes are only 10 minutes long, but it's a children's show that is produced in Australia, and all of the actors are Australian. They've done a really good job of keeping the identities of, like, the child actors, like, private, which is really great, but it just explores this family of blue healers. So they're all dogs, everybody's dog, and it explores just like the different family dynamics and in like a fun and accessible way that's appealing to both children and adults. So it's really fun, it's entertaining and enjoyable, and really wholesome and heartwarming as well.
And if you want to watch it, it's on Disney+.
It's on Disney+. You can also find it, there's like clips and episodes on like TikTok and YouTube and other places, so you can find Bluey. Trust me. If you haven't found it already, you can easily find it.
And it's worth it. Like, it is made for children, but it's also like full of life lessons for adults and parents and everything else. I think so many people watch it and are like, oh my gosh, like, no matter how good your family life was, it's like, I wish that I would have grown up like this.
Yeah. Yep. It very much, like, speaks to your inner child in like, a beautiful way. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about Dunny.
Yes. Do we want to start with a definition and etymology?
Yes,
go for it, Stacey.
Absolutely. So, Dunny is a slang term that is used in Australian English that originally had this connotation with, like, an outside toilet. So what we would call in, like, the United States, like, an outhouse, right? But it came from this British dialect so the word used to be dunkin, meaning, like, an earth closet, or in, like, an outdoor privy, like a dung is in, like, poop, and, like, ken is in, like, house, and so it used to be a little poop house. And of course it got shortened and recontextualized to now just being Dunny, as, like, this, like, slang term for using the toilet, using the restroom in general.
Perfect. So I'm going to give a quick overview maybe of what happens in this episode, and then we can talk about some of the linguistic, meaning ramification of some of these things that happen. So in this Bluey episode, the mom is asking the others to use the word toilet instead of Dunny. And the kids ask, like, is it a rude word? She's like, well, no, but would the Queen of England say it?
Right.
And the kids bring up Chloe's parents let her use this word. So, like, are we better than them?
Yeah.
And that's, like, a really, really interesting question. But another interesting thing about this episode is that by telling the kids and the husband, like the family as a whole, not to use the word Dunny, she actually encourages them to make a game of it, and they make a game trying to get the mom to say the word Dunny.
Yeah.
And they focus on it so much more because of that restriction. But when there's questions that come up, like, is our family better than Chloe's family? Can I say it in my head? The mom eventually gives in and is like, well, no, we're not better than anyone else. Like, the message is we're not trying to judge anything else. else. She just wants to be perceived as a nice family.
Yeah. There's this idea of, and this kind of, we've talked a little bit about like taboo language on the pod before, but even in this circumstance, like Dunny isn't necessarily like a taboo word. It's just a slightly ruder version of a word, right? It's just a slightly different one. So it's almost like the difference between like a friend and a mate or something like that, right? Like, well, it's a variation.
You have,
but it has
gradient,
a connotation, yeah.
Right? You have a gradient. So if we're trying to be euphemistic in polite society, yes. I'll just use a basic example. You might say something about going number 2, right?
Yes, you could say number 2.
Very, very euphemistic, a little bit more polite.
If you're being kind of cutesy,
step it up.
Yeah, if you step it up being cutesy, you might say, oh, I need to poop.
Right. And then from there, you could go up to crap, or you could go all the way to shit. Like, there's this whole continuum that you can see. And so, like, from this episode, it seems like Dunny, it isn't the nicest, but it's not really a bad word either.
Yeah, like for example, my parents, they really didn't want us saying crap in the house.
Mine either.
Yeah. And they were like, no, we need to say like a number 1 and like a number 1, number 2, we need to say like poop or something just a little bit nicer, but crap was a little harsh, right? But for other places, for other houses, for other families, crap might be perfectly fine, and shit is where you draw the line, right? And so there's this like every family, every like little group of people kind of has to determine like what language do we want to permit, and like why, and what are their implications of that. And there's the mom, Chili, in the episode, she has this like perception of like, oh, only nice families say like toilet, right? Saying Dunny means that we're not as fancy or as good as like other families, because we're using a slightly more crude term. And it's this idea of like only privileged people or people of a certain class just like abstain from obscene language, or, you know, slightly more derogatory language. And they kind of poke holes in that a little bit. And it's like, but you're still a nice family, even if you do use certain words here and there, right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that the mom pulls up the queen as the standard, right? Yes. Because in some ways it makes sense. The queen would be very, very proper, very diplomatic. The queen would have to watch everything that she says, though, in day-to-day life. And that's a very different context than a family.
Yes. Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame, right? Like the queen is this big political empiric figure. And this is just a little family of blue healers, you know? just this little family like living life and everything. And what was kind of cool at the end of the episode was, you know, they have this discussion about, you know, whether Chloe's family is good or bad for saying Dunny or not. And then like at the end, Bluey says, oh, we can't say, what was it again? It wasn't silly. It was like cheeky.
She said that her friend Chloe can't use the word naughty. She has to say cheeky.
Yeah, and so it kind of just displays and like every family is having these kinds of discussions. It's not just Bluey's family that's like negotiating with what should or should not be said. Chloe's family is doing it too, and probably for their own reasons, right? Of how they want to be seen, how they want to be perceived, how they want their children to like look at the world.
Yeah. I think there's so many interesting things about this. And I wonder, like, I really love how the moral of this Bluey episode is don't judge. Like, we should never be using language to judge other people. Yeah. And words have meaning. The language that we use does matter. Yeah. And I think in every family, like, there should be a line, right? Like, I think it would be totally fair for a mom or a dad to say, like, hey, I want our house to be a warm, welcoming place. let's avoid using words like shit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think there's a line where it is totally reasonable to do that kind of thing. But again, it's this continuum, and it's a hard decision that every family kind of has to make.
Yeah, because it's totally personal what kind of values you want in your own home and how you want them to kind of like show up and be represented.
Funnily, we are actually recording this in my house, so we're saying all of these things. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, though. Like, how do you decide what words, what kind of language is acceptable for you?
Yeah. A question that I was kind of thinking of, and I think we both have insight on since we both have had like linguistic restrictions in our youth, is how does a linguistic restriction affect a child and their perception of the world and their perception of language in general?
I think it depends on how the restriction is imposed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for myself, and maybe for you as well, there was this religious justification to wanting to be clean, wanting to be pure, and wanting the way that you behave and the language that you use to reflect that about you, which gets really complicated, right?
Yeah. For me, it was really interesting because my grandpa was a little more loose with his language, with like hell and shit and damn and stuff. And we weren't allowed to say those words, but he was. And so there was an interesting like distinction between like words that like grown-ups and like grandpas can use versus words that I can use. And it was never fully explained why he was allowed to, other than he just was, right? Like of a similar religious background, but the restriction was different. And so for me personally, like as I grew up, like I could tell that like my parents wanted a certain image, and that was why we had like language restrictions, or they wanted peace in the home, right? And so certain language wasn't allowed because it was considered like contentious, right? Like it would cause fights or something.
But you can fight with very nice language.
You can fight with like super nice language.
The fights are going to happen regardless.
Exactly.
Restricting the language just means that you're going to get way more emotional.
Yeah, you get very creative
with other words.
Yep, you get creative with how you're going to insult your sibling.
We've both been there.
Exactly. We both have a number of siblings, so yeah. But yeah, so it kind of it's this idea that within restriction there is creativity, and maybe there might be some more some like rule breaking later in life if there's not like a clear understanding or reason why.
Right. As a parent, I have a lot more empathy towards this kind of scenario now, because my son has been going through this phase where no matter what you tell him, even if you tell him the reason why you're doing something, he'll be like, but why?
Yeah.
But why? And he'll just
it's
ask
the why
that.
cycle. Yeah.
He'll ask it on repeat, and then you explain something and he'll just keep on drilling down, and you're like, I just told you why. Like, I did just explain this thing.
Yep.
But because you're growing and you're learning, you're still going to deliberately go against the opposite anyways. Like the other day we had to get into a fight about him wearing a shirt.
Yes.
You need
clothing
to wear...
is important.
Clothing is important. You need to wear a shirt to daycare. But, just because he's learning and he's a tiny kid, those are the things that we're going through. So when I look at roles like, just don't say shut up.
Right. Yeah.
I look at it and I'm like, yeah, there's like a whole debate that you could have there, but there's stages with a kid where it's like, it doesn't matter how much you explain it, that kid is still just going to rebel against it and do the opposite of what you're saying.
Yeah. So and it's developmentally appropriate for them to do so.
Exactly. And so there's some lines that you just kind of have to hold. Like, you just have to decide on and hold, even if the kid doesn't understand why. Like, some of that comes in scenarios that are actually important for safety, right? Yeah. There's sometimes where it's like, don't poke the fork into the electric socket. Like, like, it doesn't matter. I'm not like, gonna let you do that.
That's a hard line. We are not going to cross that one, yeah.
But anything that you say that you tell someone to do can be perceived as some kind of rule, and especially with kids, sometimes it's hard to explain things in a way that they're actually going to internalize and register.
Well, and the hard thing with kids, too, especially at, like, a certain age, is they just their memories are maybe not the best. Like there's another episode of Bluey, to kind of tie it back to our original subject matter, where it's basically a repeat of another episode, but a slightly different take. And the episode is about how sometimes you have to learn the same lesson over and over again. There has to be like a repetition, and a willingness to commit to, okay, like, maybe this didn't hit home the first time. Maybe you just forgot, what's yesterday to a kid, so it's that consistency that can be kind of a struggle for parents sometimes. But it is really interesting to see how, because I have a bunch of friends who are parents, and it's really interesting to see where everybody's at on like their parenting journey with their child and with the language that they use, and how like some of the parents that I know are more than happy to have their kids say shit so long as it's justified and in the right context, right? Like if they stub their toe and it hurts, yeah, you can say shit, because that is like, there's like scientific evidence that like saying a swear like that has a more taboo context can be a source of like pain relief in a weird way.
Pretty sure Mythbusters did one on that. Actually.
Yeah. There's been a few studies on that. It's a really interesting phenomenon, one that I hope to investigate in the future, but that's besides the point. But so telling kids like as they grow up a little bit more about the nuanced like aspect of language, of when and where something can be appropriate, and having them feel safe using that and experimenting with that in the home can probably be really good. I mean, these are all the kids that I know that are going through this are all still kids, so who's to say how that'll turn out for them. But it is interesting to kind of just see how people of different backgrounds are approaching these kinds of discussions with their kids, because it is highly nuanced and reflective of like the values of not only your family but your external community as well. Because we're here in Utah right now. If your child is at school and stubs his toe and says shit, he might get in trouble for it because of certain larger cultural values.
He'll probably get in trouble for it.
Yeah, but like if you were to go, like I recently came from LA, if you were to go to LA and there was like, a 6-year-old who stubbed their toe and said shit, not a whole lot of people would bat an eye at it, right?
Or if you're like in the army, you might have leaders saying swear words while they're teaching something, and that's just kind of the accepted culture of that context.
Yes.
Just to throw in something very different.
Exactly. So context, culture are all kind of like these big aspects of it, and parents have the very hard job of trying to figure out how they're gonna make that work with their families. So hey, props to you, EJ, for being a parent and taking on that challenge.
Right? It's a thing. Let's talk a little bit more about the unintended consequences, though,
of
restricting language, because I like how almost immediately when the mom says, let's not use this word, it becomes the game of let's get mom to use this word.
Yep.
And I like, this happens. I, for a while, was listening to a lot of music on the radio when I was driving, and then I switched to Spotify.
Yeah.
And when you're listening on the radio, so many things are just like, not beeped out usually with music, but they're usually just like taken out entirely.
Yeah.
So you have this space instead of bad words, or sometimes artists will actually make a clean version that replaces it. Yeah. But most of the time, it is so obvious.
Yes.
What is being replaced. Like, it's so insanely obvious. And so even though that word is not said, it still is in everybody's heads.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah, like when in the episode when Bingo says, can I think, Dunny? Can I think about the word? Like, oh my, your heart goes out to the child, because you're like, yeah, like the language is there. We all know the word exists. Just because it's not being said doesn't mean you don't know what it is, right? Or like,
exactly.
And there is sort of an odd focus that happens when there is an absence of language or an absence of like a word. You're like, oh, we clearly like, it's just like an obvious sense of like, well, you're not supposed to say it, but we all want to, right?
Or it's like there's this social need almost when something is restricted to test those boundaries.
Yes.
And that'll happen like the moment that a book becomes banned.
Yeah.
It becomes like eternally popular.
Yes.
And so I think the way that restrictions are applied can be really important, and you want to be aware of unintended consequences of how you present restrictions if you want to apply them in any way.
I have found that one of the principles of physics works really well in this scenario, and a bunch of scenarios actually. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think that definitely applies to taboo language. For like, the more you censor, the more opposite, like, people are gonna think about it or focus on it and hyperfixate on it, right? And it is kind of just like an interesting principle of like, yeah, if you put like a ton of focus on like linguistic restrictions, then like your children or the people around you are going to be hyper aware of that, and it's going to like, you know, initiate discussions or cause like cause problems if someone takes issue with it, right? So it is kind of interesting to see how, if like the restrictions do cause like a reaction of some sort.
Definitely. And I think there's also multiple ways that those restrictions are approached.
Yes.
So to give an example, like in Utah and like everywhere this happens, but I see it so much in Utah, and that's probably, bias of me being here. But a lot of people will just put one-to-one replacements for swear words.
Yeah.
So maybe you'll say fudge, or, the same thing for any swear word.
Heck.
Yeah. Heck, darn, dang.
Yeah.
But there's so many of these replacements. And if you're just replacing that word with another word, is that actually any better? Like, everybody knows what the original was.
Yeah.
Is it actually changing the way that you're thinking? Is it actually making you like a more polite or thoughtful person if you're just doing a one-to-one switch? Like, if you're trying to restrict language, should the goal be to change the way that you're thinking rather than just to restrict a single word? I have lots of questions.
Oh, of course. And it's a big nuanced like problem, and it goes to this whole aspect that EJ and I have backgrounds in like Mormonism. There's this idea of like the letter of the law versus like the spirit of the law, right? And like when I think about the restriction, like the language council in like France, whatever they call that, the council that decides the academy. The academy. They're deciding like what the French words are going to be for all these newfangled objects that are coming out, right? Like the idea behind it is, we want French to stay relevant. We want French to stay alive and not necessarily be as heavily influenced by other languages. But, like, they go about it in a way, and there's this idea of, like, strictness to it, and the more strict you are, like, the better of a person you are, the more you adhere to whatever the academy demands, like, the better your French is, right? When, like, in actuality, like, French is very much colored by the languages around it, just like any other language, right? And so it kind of, like you were saying, it's this idea of, like, what is the spirit behind the restriction? Is it for a matter of control, a sense of, like, oh, if anything's going to change in the world, I want to be able to at least have some kind of handle on it? Or is it more like, well, given our circumstances, this is a better option to maybe implement in this scenario, right? So it's kind of a fun little interesting game of like, where are the lines, and what is the idea behind it, and why is the restriction happening in the first place, and what does that entail? So yeah, it's a huge cacophony of just life is so nuanced, EJ.
It is. And that's where, like, I love pragmatics.
Yeah.
Because I think things like swear words especially, it's so important to look at them in context.
Yeah.
Like, are you saying that because you stubbed your toe and you're, like, in a lot of pain?
Yeah.
Or are you saying that because you're trying to push the boundary? You're trying to irritate your mom. You're trying to, make waves at church. That's very different from, like, this is a natural part of my vocabulary and how I interact with this group of friends.
Yeah.
So you really need to take those things into context. Think about the language that you choose to use. And even if you totally avoid swear words in your daily life, think about how you're avoiding swear words. Like, how are you still pushing the boundaries with language? What are you saying when you are really upset, when you are really hurt?
And how does it make you feel when you say those things? Because I think a lot of times language can be an inherently, like, people perceive it as like an inherently cognitive process, but language involves your whole body, and our whole body and our feelings and emotions are tied to language. And so as you're thinking about like how you're deciding to choose your language in your everyday life, how are the words you're choosing making you feel, and how do they make the people around you feel, and why, I think is another thing to think about too.
Yeah. And then don't judge other families for drawing that line in a different place than you do, or other individuals. Like, maybe they're used to being in a context where flipping off their friends is just kind of a normal thing and the proper response to some fooling around. Like, the context that you come from is very different from the context that a lot of the world comes from. And it's possible that you live in a neighborhood where everyone has a similar linguistic context. But if you leave that, don't be surprised when people view things differently. And don't take it offensively unless it's intended offensively. And I think most of the time you can tell.
Oh, I mean, I hope so. There are some circumstances where if there's enough of a cultural difference, it might be hard to tell, just because, you know, the way that British people insult people is slightly different from how like Americans insult people, and all this other stuff. But there can be discussions about it, and there can be like a learning process, and approach it from a point of curiosity.
Definitely. And you think even within the US, like if you go into the South and you hear someone say,
bless your heart.
Bless your heart.
Bless your heart.
You knew what I was going to say before I even said it.
Well, it's like we're friends or something.
Yeah, cool. Well, is there anything else that you would like to touch on with this Bluey episode?
I think we pretty much covered it. We shared our love of Bluey because it's absolutely amazing. We talked a little bit about taboo language and kind of the influences that imposing taboo languages can have on not just like the larger society, but your individual families. So I think this is a fun little personable episode.
Yeah, I don't think that I have anything else to add either. So definitely go and watch the Dunny episode of Bluey if you're interested.
It's really good. It's super cute and fun.
Yeah. And feel free to shoot us any questions or comments on our Instagram at For the Love of Language. We'd love to hear from you. Have a great day.
See ya!